All right, everybody, we're going to get started now. I am recording it, so most of you are aware. I'm going to introduce our folks who are leading us today. Dr. Grace Bullock, mental health strategist and policy analyst with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Division here at Oregon Department of Ed, and Dr. Beth Wiggum, CCR program counseling specialist at the Office of Teaching and Learning and Assessment. And deep apologies from Carmen Urbina, who cannot get on. I think it's a positive response that we had so many, an unanticipated one that we would need to increase the Zoom limit. So, deep apologies, and we will offer several things. One, a recorded version of this. Two, access to the slides. And three, to continue to meet regularly and updates and provide support. Grace, I'll hand that over to you.
Thanks, Carmen. Sorry, Shandy. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Oh, good. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you and welcome. We greatly appreciate your participation. I thought I'd start our time off together with an invitation just to take a moment and see if we can all settle together, take a couple of breaths, maybe slow down your breath a little bit. Thank you. So as you can imagine, we are all dealing with some pretty rapid changes right now, and we have a lot to do together, so I'm going to dive right in. Let's see, how can I get this forward? There we go. All right, so today we're going to cover a few things with you. We're going to talk briefly about Governor Brown's directive to ODE and partners. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges and the strengths that this presents us with. We'll talk a little bit about what we're recommending in terms of a tiered approach for providing mental health support to students, families, and each other. And we will share with you the guidance that we have developed in collaboration with our partners that we would like to put forth to you today. So we're going to start by just giving you a little bit of guidance about the question and answer session to begin with, so you can begin to provide us with your feedback. And as you know, we've invited all of you here, and we're very, very grateful for the turnout, because you are a huge part of making this successful. You are a huge part of supporting children and families during this emerging and evolving situation with COVID-19 and beyond. So we're going to ask you to please focus your questions on mental health guidance, because that's what our agenda is for today. And to post your questions in the Zoom chat area, which hopefully is visible to you. Please list a theme for your questions so that we can organize your questions accordingly. So it might be crisis supports or working with seniors, equity, etc. We're going to ask you to be concise so that we can read your questions as they pop up. And we will respond to as many questions as humanly possible during our time together, but we will also take your questions after this call and review them, organize them in a way that is most useful to you, and we'll set up an FAQ area as soon as possible. Unfortunately, we won't be able to respond to all your questions, particularly given the number of you that are on the call, but we'll do our best to be as responsive as possible. So you're probably aware that in response to COVID-19, Governor Brown has given ODE and partners a directive to provide guidance to school districts and communities to ensure continuity of mental health services for children and families. And that is really what is motivating our work at this point and motivating the time that we're sharing with you today. And so we all care about children and families in our communities very much. And the pandemic that has presented itself as a really stressful and difficult time in education, and also in our personal lives, in our families. And so this also is an opportunity for us to really rethink how we are engaging in the business of education and in the business of supporting children and families. And this is going to require us as adults in particular to be really mindful, not only of how we lead, but also to be mindful of our own physical and mental health as we move through this experience. Because as you may already be experiencing, These are pretty highly stressful times. We're all in it together, and it does affect our families and our loved ones and our friends in many different ways. So we encourage you to take care of yourself. This also particularly for school counselors, for other mental health professionals, and for administrators, prevents some unique challenges that you're probably already facing and that we will continue to face for some time. But we want to recognize, first off, the incredible depth of expertise and wisdom that you already bring to this situation. Most of you, if not all of you, have a lot of experience in this area. And so we want to offer our guidance and support with that mindset, that we are honoring and recognizing what you already do, what you already know, and providing some guidance that we are hoping will be as fair and equitable and responsive to the needs of all Oregonians and all children and families in schools as much as humanly possible. So we recognize that districts are going to vary widely in terms of the resources that you have available, in terms of the policies and procedures that you already have in place, and in terms of the access that you're going to have to your students. So again, we encourage you to take our advice and our guidance within that spirit in which it's offered. And I think this is really requiring us at ODE and you out there to think really creatively about how we can adapt our work in response to these current circumstances and potentially future circumstances as well. So we're going to offer the following guidelines in response to Governor Brown's directive, and hopefully they'll be of use to you. So in beginning to think about how to address the COVID-19 outbreak and beyond, it's important for us to think about what challenges we face in our particular schools and our districts, et cetera. Think about how we care for children and adults. So how can we change what we're doing or not change what we're doing to be most responsive to the needs of children and adults? How can we adapt what we're doing? So can we utilize technologies, resources, the online environment in different ways than we have in the past? And I would say even more importantly, how can we leverage the strengths that we already have? I can speak personally and say that there are times where I feel very, very challenged, and I'm not always focusing on the strengths that I have. Sometimes I'm just focusing on the overwhelm that I feel when I consider what it is that we're facing right now. And I would encourage you to really think about, when possible, what strengths do you bring to this, because you all have them or you wouldn't be here. And most importantly, how do we meet students and families where they are? As you know, working in Oregon education, every school is different, every building is different, every person is different. People have a huge range of access to resources, all the way from none to a tremendous amount of access. And so how do we meet families and each other where we are in this current moment? So in response at this point in time, ODE has already provided mental health and social support guidance on the COVID-19 website. And if you look to the third tab over from the left, you'll see the mental health and social support guidance area. And we have already populated that with a number of guidance documents dealing with things like how to support high school seniors, how to deal with racism, which unfortunately has increased, as you probably all know, because of the origins of COVID-19, how to talk to children about COVID-19, how to support children and teens through loss and trauma, and a number of different areas. So those guidance documents are free for you to use and to share. We will also be adding a few more, including a specific guidance document for school counselors, administrators, and other mental health professionals, which hopefully will be up today or tomorrow, and other guidance in terms of how to deal with things like abuse and how to support LGBTQIA students. So continue to check back and you'll see that we are adding resources as rapidly as we can create them. As always, Oregon Department of Education views education through an equity lens, and we, particularly at this point in time, encourage you to be culturally responsive to not only the needs, but the strengths of children and families in our community. Many families have existing social supports that we can leverage and we can use to help support the mental health of children and families and adults. Many of them already have structures in place in which they provide guidance to their youth. So I would encourage you to be mindful of that. And also, as you can imagine, to be aware of technology, access to technology, and what types of mechanisms that you can use to stay in frequent contact with your kids. So important to remember. This document I am only putting in front of you not to read quickly because it won't be up very long, but this is basically, you'll see this in our guidance document, a tiered approach to serving our communities. We understand that for some of you, this may be useful. And for some of you, you already have very comprehensive strategies in place, so we're not proposing to supplant them. But for those of you that are wanting to know how we're thinking about supporting the work, this is a general schematic that shows what we think might be best practices. And obviously, part of the motivation for this is our anticipation that the amount of students that are coming to guidance is going to increase, and that either immediately or over time, particularly as school closures extend, there may be some children and adolescents for whom this becomes more difficult and potentially dysregulating. So we're anticipating that for most of us, our workloads will increase, and we may need some way to think about how to balance the work so that we don't become overwhelmed. So in that spirit, we provide this tiered guidance. So we're beginning with what happens when you receive a referral. To give you a little bit of context, we are encouraging teachers who, particularly teachers of students who are having anywhere from mild to crisis levels of distress, immediately contact whoever the appropriate person is in their school building or their district. So that may, in some districts, be administrators. In other districts, it may be a school counselor, or it may be a school psychologist or a mental health professional. So you will be receiving likely from teachers and others referrals. When you receive a referral, we suggest that if you already have established district procedures and protocols, that you follow them. If not, that you quickly assess a student's mental health and well-being. And again, if you need any tools or guidance in that area, we are providing those explicitly on the website in the school counselor document. Immediately determine the level of severity, and what tier of service you think a student will need. And if the student is in crisis, we would recommend that you immediately move to tier 3, and we'll discuss that in more detail in a moment. And we also ask that you please heed the guidance of school counselor and virtual school counseling. That link is provided at the bottom of this slide, but it also is provided in our guidance documents for you as well. I'm going to turn off my audio here so don't keep going. Okay, so we're again organizing child or students' issues into tiers. And so the first tier would be tier 1, which would be considered more of a universal approach. So if you are referred a child who has a fairly low level of distress, we suggest a fairly responsive but light level of support. So again, there are mental health resources that you can refer to on the ODE COVID website for guidance there. We would recommend, if possible, to schedule weekly check-ins with a student as needed and as long as needed. Offer support to the teacher and staff if, again, appropriate and needed around how to support the student. And ask the teacher to notify you immediately if the student's problems persist or particularly if they get worse. So again, this is fairly light touch, but we just would like to make sure that children are staying reasonably stable, getting better, and that we're addressing their needs if they tend to, if their issues persist or worsen. So typically, tier 2 in a public health or prevention model is the place where we would be considering targeted interventions, either group interventions or individual. For purposes of providing guidance, we're dividing Tier 2 into Tier 2A and Tier 2B. So Tier 2A would be what we would call a low-level targeted support, where a student has a moderate level of distress, but not a level of distress that's sufficient enough where you think that they need a referral to a mental health provider, either in your school district or building or community. So for children of who are dealing with fairly moderate levels of distress, we would suggest sitting down with them and developing a resource plan that identifies their strengths, identifies their challenges, but also points to how they can use their strengths to help deal with the challenges they're facing. Potentially, you might consider working with them around a list of activities that they consider to be pleasant and enjoyable. And again, because we are dealing with social distancing and stay-at-home measures, we may need to be creative with those particular recommendations. Provide a list of trusted adults to refer to for help, and also consider a plan if the child or student feels as though they are in need of additional supports. Who do they go to? What does that look like? And maybe even go as far as providing contact information. So we would suggest scheduling regular check-ins with a student in Tier 2A weekly. And again, ask a teacher to notify you if the student's problems persist or if they get worse, ask them to notify you immediately. Okay. So Tier 2B, as I said a second ago, is for higher level targeted support. And this would be for a student who has high level of distress. So that might look like fairly extreme anxiety, a lot of rumination, a student that's very, very sad, a student that is just having a difficult time coping with whatever reality it is that they're facing. So immediately we would suggest creating a health, safety, and resource plan similar to what you would do in Tier B, but potentially flesh that out a little bit more in terms of focusing on where do they go if they need supports, and having a slightly specified plan for crisis if and when that should arise. Hopefully it won't. Consider an external referral if possible. At some point, hopefully in the near future, we'll be collaborating with OHA to get more specific lists of resources that are available in your area. They are currently working to see what mental health providers are available, what public health resources are available. So we will get those resources to you as quickly as we can. But consider an external referral in this case and facilitate a warm handoff. In other words, contact that provider directly and introduce them to your student. If possible, some of you may be able to offer short-term counseling, but again, that may depend on your access to resources and the number of children or students that you have coming to you for help. Please do consider involving caregivers, particularly for children that are under the age of 14. We suggest communicating with teachers regarding academic expectations, particularly if a child is experiencing anxiety or depression or some sort of mental or psychological or emotional distress around their schoolwork. We think that by continuing to push academically, that might actually not serve in the best interest of a child's mental health, so be mindful of that. And once again, to ask teachers or staff to notify you immediately if a student's symptoms worsen or if the student is in crisis. So last but not least, what to do when we make it to Tier 3 if a child is referred to you that is at risk for suicide or imminent harm. We do have specific guidance in the mental health area on the ODE COVID-19 website. Again, that is a more detailed version of this guidance. If a child is at risk for, or a student is at risk for imminent harm and they are not willing or able to work with you to get more access to other resources, which we'll describe in a minute, please call 911. There are other avenues where you can get more support. And these are the avenues that we recommend below. Some school districts will be able to and have the capacity to conduct a formal risk assessment. And if you are able to do that, and that's something that you have trained professionals in-house to do, please do that. But if you do not have risk assessment capabilities on site, we suggest that you call the National Suicide Hotline, the numbers provided. Lines for Life, that is a suicide and crisis organization in Oregon, has agreed to provide remote risk assessment and safety planning to school districts in Oregon from Monday to Friday, I believe, and from 8 to 4:30. I think those are the hours that they'll be available. This will not begin until probably later this week or the beginning of next week. And as soon as that information is available, ODE will provide you with a direct phone number specifically for school districts. We also suggest that you consult ODE's How to Prevent Suicide guidance. Again, that is on the mental health section of the website. Refer a child to an outside mental health provider. Again, we will be providing more resources to you to let you know where those people are. And communicate regularly with parents, guardians, and trusted adults. Make sure in this particular case that the loop is closed, that the adults in the system are aware of what's going on. You can offer caregivers resources such as Reach Out Oregon, which is a terrific website that has a lot of resources for families dealing with suicide or a suicidal individual. And we recommend that you check in frequently with the students, with their family, and with their teacher as appropriate. Obviously, there are issues of confidentiality, and we encourage you and strongly encourage you to respect those, but you're all aware of those. And if, again, you need more guidance, please reach out and we'll be happy to provide you support. So those are the three-tier approach that we are recommending. And again, if you already have a concrete and well-established set of procedures and protocols in place, we encourage you to use what works for you. So at this point, we're going to invite you to provide us with your feedback. And as I said again, we're going to do our very best to respond to as many questions as possible. And what we would like to know is, what guidance do you need to help and support your students and their families? And what guidance do you need to help and support you in your work? So we are going to begin to look at the questions that are coming up in the Zoom chat, and Dr. Wiggum will read those out loud, and then we'll do our best to respond as we are able to. Okay, so thank you for listening. Beth, I know you're out there, so we can begin with the questions at any time.
Great, I'm here.
Beth, I think you might be on mute.
Can you hear me, Grace?
You're not on mute.
Okay.
We can hear you, Beth. Can you
For
hear?
those of you that I can see on video, can you hear Beth? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can, or a thumbs down if you can't?
Great.
You can hear Beth. Okay, it's me. That's right. Oh, Beth, I put everything on mute. My apologies. Technology is so much fun. All right, thanks, Beth. My apologies. So please begin with the questions.
Great, yeah, just a quick one that came in a couple minutes ago. Grace, you started to answer it. It has to do with virtual communication. And I think maybe someone might just want a little more clarification around what's the recommendation for notifying about a student in crisis. So it might be coming from possibly a teacher, and they're concerned about notifying school counselors via email. So their question is, what would we recommend?
You know, that's a really good question. And as I understand it, and Beth, feel free to weigh in, at least in the world of psychology that I work in, email is not considered a secure source, so I would recommend a phone call. Beth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would agree. Phone call, and then there's some platforms that are a little more secure that you could use, and email would probably most definitely not be one of those. And also, it might be something that you can set up through your school, through school administrators, to set up a protocol with how you might address those, the concerns that might be coming in. So check with the administrator and see if you can set up something, and then we can help provide you some resources for platforms or ways to virtually do that. Okay.
And some of the crisis lines that we have provided have online access for students. There are chats, there are texts, and there are other ways as well. So texting is a possibility for some of these resources as well.
So another question has come in around communication, and a question around the use of the phone, their phone while they're at home. And it says, what phone are we to use while we are told to stay home, stay safe?
What phone are you to use?
Yes. So I think it's whether they're using a personal phone.
Right. I would suggest getting guidance from your district on that. I think different districts probably have different recommendations. So obviously the short answer would be whichever is most secure. Beth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, someone has suggested Google Voice as an option, and you don't have to use your personal cell number. And then another person also suggested star 67. So it allows you to call someone and it be anonymous.
Yes.
And there's other sharing of resources. Thank you. Is there any other questions that you guys might have? Everybody might have.
Also, just wanted to let you know our website has been updated, and this guidance that Grace is referencing is now online, and I also put the link inside the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Shindine.
Another question that's come in, and it has to do with the referral process. So does ODE have any guidance as to how the referral process will look if most forms of communication between students and staff are pre-recorded? And that has to do with crisis distress symptoms aren't totally evident. So it looks like a multi-question. So that's the first part of the question. So what's the referral process for that?
So again, can you clarify the referral process if there's a child in crisis or student in crisis?
So yeah, so if staff are communicating through a pre-recorded means, what is the referral process if they're not able to determine whether a student is in crisis distress?
I would say, and please feel free to add, Beth, I would say if there's any doubt as to whether or not a student is in crisis, it's important to reach out and either contact one of the crisis referral lines that we have suggested, or contact someone, if you have a mental health provider that you have access to. It's really, depending upon where you're at in terms of skills and training, some of us have experience with immediate crisis and risk assessment guidance and know how to do that. And some of us will not have that access. So if you are working with a student, you think they might be in crisis, I would err on the side of calling or contacting Lines for Life or the National Suicide Hotline.
And if I could just add in, I'd also recommend that you post resources. What we've also seen districts do is, so whether it's on your website or counseling department website, there's also email responses that students can get a hold of you if they're trying to respond of more crisis numbers, information that they can contact. If you list those for all students, so if we're thinking tier 1, if you just have that on your website ready to go, they can access that if they're needing supports or resources, if these are pre-recorded messages or teaching lessons that are going out.
Yes,
so another question.
Oh, go ahead. I just wanted to add a little bit. So we have vetted resources in a number of different places. One is in the school counselor and other mental health professionals guidance document that is now online. We also have a more fleshed out, for lack of a better word, a list of resources in the What Adults Can Do to Prevent Suicide document, as well as the Youth Suicide Prevention document. also on our website, and those have more specific and targeted resources. And as I said earlier, we are working with OHA to get lists out of local providers that are still doing business. And as soon as we get those lists out, we will let you know so that you have access to that information as well. And I agree with Beth that it's important for districts to post clearly that information on their website so that students and families and staff have access to that information quickly.
Okay. Another question that's come in is around equity and how do we make sure short-term counseling equitably accessible for all students regardless of access to platforms with video chat?
That's a good question. I might defer to you this one, Beth. What I can say is this is something that has been on our minds from day one, and Lines for Life fulfills that need at a crisis level. I think we're still working on trying to figure that out at a non-crisis level, so for tier 1 and 2 supports. Obviously, some districts will have resources in place and others will not. So first line is to consult with your administration. But Beth, any other thoughts you have?
Yeah, this is a good question, challenging too. So I think in some part it might depend on how you're operating from what counseling theory. So for instance, if you're more talk theory, it might be difficult to do the short-term counseling if there's not a platform with the video chat feature. Maybe that might be more through phone. If you're more cog behavioral and you're giving students or you're running groups, short-term groups or individual counseling, you might be giving some homework assignments for students to do and then have an opportunity somehow to kind of have them have a discussion and then you're facilitating that discussion. So there might be just different ways based on your individual approach and preference to doing that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up different models, Beth, because I think that this is going to challenge us to think creatively and maybe somewhat outside the box of some of the models that we've historically used to interact with students and their families. So not that we have a whole lot of spare time to investigate models, but there may be others who are working in this space who might have suggestions. And we're trying to facilitate some cross-pollination of information. And I know that Dr. Wiggum, Beth, is also working on that. And so I think additional guidance will be forthcoming to hopefully help bridge some of those questions.
Yeah. So another question that's come in has to do around culturally responsiveness and a question whether ODE will provide support for language translation between teachers and families.
The answer, as far as I know it, is we don't know yet. So some of these questions we will need to continue to explore and investigate over time and do our best to provide resources. I'm not sure if ODE will be able to do that at the state level. Beth, do you want to add anything to that, or Shandine?
No, not this time.
Okay. We are aware of it though. Thank you for the question.
Another question that we received are there recommendations around connecting with students directly? So for example, many of the phone calls that this individual is getting are with parents, guardians, not the student directly.
That is another good question. It's one that comes up frequently. It depends on whether or not the student is willing, able, and wanting to connect. And you know, really, parents are in large part the agents of change, particularly for younger children. So I think it's important to respect the parent or caregiver relationship with the child, but we also do not want to leave the child out of the equation. So again, it's a complex question that we don't have a singular answer for. Obviously, we want to honor the parents in the system and try to involve the children as much as appropriately possible. And there are going to be some big developmental differences as well. But the more that we can include the entire system in our response, I think the more effective it will be.
And I would add to that.
If you could use ODE's resources, there is information that you can give parents to help them
Yes.
kind of help their identify whether their kiddos are having some issues that are escalating. So it might be an opportunity for you to kind of connect with them and give them the resources that they need to then help connect the students where they need to go next.
I would also add to that, when you think parent, think family, think caregiver, think expand the concept of parent in this context.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we can fully anticipate that, if we can use our own households as a litmus test, I think we can anticipate that pretty much universally families are going to be under a considerable amount of stress, or at least a lot more stress than they're used to. So we can anticipate that there will be more calls and more requests for guidance as this COVID-19 outbreak progresses.
Another question that we have is regarding provisions of 504 plans, and are counselors and staff supposed to interpret accommodations per these circumstances? So are they assumed to be provided as practicality allows, for example, anticipating concerns from parent students?
I'm going to refer that one to you, Beth.
Yeah, so provision of 504 plans. So regardless of our situation that we're in with our crisis, school counseling programs and schools have to provide the 504 accommodations. So if that means looking at your 504s and determining whether they would work for whatever type of distance counseling or learning that is occurring in your district, you'll want to see that those 504s will be in, that they'll be something that they can use, and that will still be useful for the student. So you might want to just look over your 504s and then double check if you might need to do any updates based on our current situation.
Excellent. Thanks, Beth. Other questions?
Yeah, so another question is, the American School Counselor Association says not to use personal phones or email in one of their guidance documents, which is called Planning for Virtual Distance School Counseling During Emergency Shutdown. And the person says that they do not think that school districts are providing an alternative platform for direct student guardian connections.
Yeah, obviously this is a big concern, and we don't want to provide guidance that is contrary to any of the guidance from the national organizations. I think that we're going to be challenged to be creative and think about ways of communicating with each other that that are outside what the normal realms of communication are. Ultimately, I would encourage people to do what is in their safety interests. And again, this is one of those questions that we don't have the answer for, but something that we are actively thinking about. Beth, I don't know if you have any additional guidance here.
Yeah, so it's not something that we have in the moment, but there are out there resources for different ways to virtually connect with students, and that are confidential, and so or keep with confidentiality. So we could work to provide that for you if you think that there might be a need for a list of what those are. I know some other states have done that, and so we'd be happy to provide that if there. So just let us know if there is a need. As far as personal phones, I think there was some recommendations early on around some other ways to kind of get around personal phone use. So another question, Grace, this might be for you. Can you talk about resources for students and families experiencing domestic violence?
Yes, I am currently working on guidance document in that particular subject. We should, if it hasn't already been posted, we will have a guidance document up shortly talking about what to do if a student is reporting violence or any form of abuse in the household. We are currently working on a guidance document for adults if they're experiencing any form of abuse or violence in the household. So that should be up shortly, and that will include access to resources and helplines. If you need that information sooner than later, we're going to provide our email addresses to you at the end of this. and I would be happy to share with you the resources that I have at the current moment.
Another question that's come in is, do we need to be considering socio-emotional growth lessons, activities, outreach, or only focusing on referrals and crisis response?
That is an excellent question. I would say that all of this work, whether it be academic, in the mental health space or elsewhere, needs to be considerate of social, emotional, mental health and trauma-informed principles and practices. I don't see them as being mutually exclusive or something that we can separate out. So in terms of best practices, anything that we can do to support social emotional growth would be preferred. In terms of whether we're actually providing specific social emotional instruction, I think that that's going to depend upon the person and the amount of bandwidth and resources that they have, given the amount of work that they have on their plate. Beth, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I could, if you're implementing a comprehensive school counseling program, please remember to still operate through the framework and through a comprehensive approach. So when you are able to kind of assess the student's need, whether that is academic, socio-emotional, or career college, you're going to be supporting them in whatever tier or whatever approach is needed for that individual student. So if you can just remember to kind of approach the work from the framework, I think, and through, if you use that tiered approach, it will help you be able to still meet all the students' needs, whatever domain, developmental domain that they're falling into. And the question also was asking around the lessons, activities, outreach. So if you determine that students are needing more support, socio-emotional, that might be for that moment, what you're focusing on, developing lessons or group support or some individual support for students. And then the referrals and crisis is we want you to be aware of the resources and also know what you have locally so that you can provide those for all your students, but then also directly connecting those students if you notice that they're in a higher tier 2 or tier 3, that then they're able to you're able to give them those resources right away.
Great, thanks.
So question come in is, families are struggling financially right now. Is there a financial resource posted on the OED website, or it could have been ODE website? One example would be rent payment support, but any type of financial resources.
I don't know, Shandine, is this something you can respond to? I have not seen all of the resources that have been posted in detail, but you probably have more knowledge than I do about this.
So Grace, this is Carmen. I was able to log in.
Oh, hi, Carmen.
Hi, this is Carmen Urbina, Deputy Director. We are working with OHA and DHS right now in collaboration with ODE to be able to provide real on-time resources for families. And this is definitely something that we can do, for Oregon, but also the ability that we have to be able to do this for communities. So this is we're thinking about this, we're looking at this, and hopefully we can add this information in the next week or so.
Thanks, Carmen, that's great news.
Another question that's come in is there any insight around the legal age limit for students staying home alone? Is it still 10 years of age, or is this changing because of our circumstances? And then this is thinking of families who have to leave home to work.
Great question, and I do not have the answer. Does anyone else?
I don't.
Okay, that will fall under the we will get back to you about the answer category. Thanks for the question.
Another question that's come in is guidance on determining new 504s at this time.
Beth, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I would say still follow whatever your protocol is, if it's the SIT or SST process for screening possible new 504s, or if you're running RTI or PBIS model, you might have referrals coming in for possible 504s, or I would say create a system within your school if it's not, or if you're still wondering what what that protocol might be like, create a protocol that allows teachers to refer students that are maybe struggling, and then the 504s would still happen for students regardless of our distance learning.
So Beth, what I'm also hearing and reading, again, this is Carmen, is that it would be, what I'm hearing is a very strong request around 504s and a lot of questions around how is it that we're going to be doing this in the time of virtual communication. And is there even an opportunity for us to be able to do a readjustment to the 504 and make it more in time and real for the students and also the virtual reality that we're currently living in? So we don't have answers to that question, but definitely we are going to bring that back to our experts, and also love the suggestion of having a very specific webinar just on 504s. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Carmen. And I had mentioned earlier about 504 plans, and that those would still move forward. You would just address whether they are still going to work with whatever platform or environment that you're operating in within your districts. But like Carmen said, we'll have more information. And let's see what else. A question has come in: if families are not connecting with schools and students are not participating in academics and no staff members has made contact with the family, should a DHS call be made?
That's a big question. I don't have a short answer for that. I don't know if you want to make any recommendations, Beth.
In our guidance, we did kind of allude to, or there might be something that will be coming out that we could provide if that's an interest for you, of what to do if you're not hearing back from students or families. And so some recommendations might be, there might be a different mode of communication that might work for that family. So try to figure out what would work best. And then if there is an urgent concern about a student that you're not hearing back from, then there should be a protocol in place, or you develop a protocol with your administrators of how you would address those situations.
Beth, you know, I think this would be a good time for you to talk just a little bit about the guidance document that you and other collaborators have put together, so people can have a sense of other types of guidance that will be coming.
Yeah, so one of the guidance documents that I've been working on has been with Portland Public, Beaverton School District, North Clackamas School District, and we've also had Hatching Results. And what it is to support the work that you guys are doing around Comprehensive School Counseling Program, and how do we still do the things that we need to do during this time period through a tiered approach. And really it's to best address the needs of students and still meet them where they're at, given whatever format that we're trying to do that. So this guidance document breaks down seniors and then 9th grade through 11th in a tiered approach. And then it provides a middle school perspective, and then also elementary. And it is in our framework for Comprehensive School Counseling Program for the manage part of our framework component, and then as well as our delivery. So when we think of delivery, it would include direct services to students, and then the indirect, where you're providing the consultation and collaboration with others. So it helps us to really think through how we still do our work during this time, and through a multidisciplinary approach. And so when we kind of go talking back, or referring back to what Grace had said in the beginning, you know, when you're taking care of yourself and thinking of this load and the increased load that's going to be on you, thinking about where do we need to build in those handoffs to other people from a multidisciplinary team that can address some of those other higher tiered parts of our work that you know, where we can allow us to free us up to focus on some of the other essential needs of students. And so that is a guidance document that is being developed. It's being finalized, and the hope is that it's a supporting guidance document. Districts can take it and modify it, which they have. Some other districts are creating their own resources, and so we want to provide this as a tool for you to just help think through a comprehensive whole child approach.
Yeah, it's a wonderful and detailed document, and I think it'll be very useful. It'll be very useful. So we really appreciate all your work on that, Beth.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Let's see, another one that has come in is, will there be a change in essential skill requirements for seniors, and a question around the credit requirements for current seniors?
I'm going to refer that one to you, Carmen. Oh, did we lose Carmen? Okay, the answer is that there is guidance around that particular question.
I can answer that.
Oh, okay, Shandine, thanks.
Hi. I apologize. I think Carmen might have hopped on another call. We're actually want to focus all of our conversation here not on the graduation guidance right now, but there will be some coming out in the coming days.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions, Beth?
Not at this time. Anybody else? Do you have any more questions?
Anything else, anyone out there?
It looks like another one's come in from me around, I refer to the new guidance document for comprehensive school counseling programs. They're wondering when that will be available and where counselors can access it. So we're actually working on where it will be located. It is possible that it might be located on the Comprehensive School Counseling Program webpage on ODE's website, and not with the rest of the COVID-19 resources. We're going to work through that, and we will communicate that out to you where that will be located. And it's there's a question around when it will be available. I'm hoping to have it finalized this week. We needed more internal feedback on it, and we have the external eyes on it. And so we just want to get it right to make sure that it will meet the needs of different district sizes and needs. Another question that has come in is when will the document be available with the Hatching Results collaboration? That one I'm hoping very soon this week. We'll try to get it finalized. Will this be available for people who are not getting this call? Is a question that's come in.
This session? Yes, as I understand it, this is being recorded, and we will let you know as soon as it's posted and available for public access. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we are compiling all of your questions, and we will sort through them and create an FAQ area. Again, we'll let you know as soon as that's available.
I'm sorry, I had some issues logging back in. This is Carmen. We are going to be having another webinar, and again, apologies that we were only going to be, our current platform only supported 100 folks. We are sending a communication to all the districts and the counselors in a few minutes after this webinar is done, with a link to the recorded webinar and the PowerPoint. And we are scheduling this, Shandine, Beth, and tomorrow at noon from 12 to 1.
Great, thanks, Carmen. Other questions, Beth?
Yep, it looks like another one's come in around the virtual platform. So what does ODE recommend for group chats with students? And I mentioned earlier that this might be a resource that we can provide. It sounds like there's multiple questions around what platforms for virtual communication that's confidential, and it sounds like a resource that we could provide for you. Another question that we got.
These questions have been, sorry, Beth. Yeah, these questions have been really helpful, and they're helping to guide us as we consider what are the priorities for you in terms of responding to what it is that you need to do your work well. So I just want to thank you for these questions, and we will do our best to provide guidance as quickly as possible. Beth?
So another question that's come in is around communication, and they're wondering how do the people around the state or on the platform get on an email list for when updates are made, and how do they know which one to join? I was just adding that part on.
Good question. Anyone have an answer to that one?
So this is Beth, and I do have a listserv for comprehensive school counseling programs. So if you're implementing a comprehensive school counseling program or working in collaboration with one, I do have a listserv. And at the end, we have our, here we go, our contact information that you can get a hold of me. Send me an email and let me know if you'd like to join the listserv. And just let me know what your role is, because I'll send out information for comprehensive school counseling programs, and it may directly support your work or indirectly.
All right, we'll have time for one more question. Have we exhausted our questions, Beth?
We have, yep. Just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to add another question.
Well, it sounds like we're good for the moment. Again, we really want to thank you for your time and thank you for all of your wonderful feedback and your participation. We recognize that you are all very busy, and it means a lot to us that you would take the time to log in and participate. Again, we will do our best to get responses to your questions as quickly as possible. We are working in collaboration with a lot of folks right now, and so we're working and doing our best to get you the best guidance that is representative of what other agencies are doing, as well as getting guidance from other districts. So we will do our best to pull all that information together and get it back to you as quickly as possible. Again, feel free to contact Beth if you want to get onto her list. And with that, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, Carmen or Shandine, before we sign off.
Just thank you so much to Dr. Bullock and Dr. Wiggum, who have been working around the clock to provide all of this guidance. And please keep sending in your questions. This is you know, a moving solutions. They're iterative. We're generating more, and people are putting their best brains and creativity into how we can do our best to show up with love and grace for our students and families.
Yes, oh, there you are, Beth. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. And may you be well. Take good care.